Hello and welcome to Making Art on Air, the official podcast of the Art Academy of Cincinnati. I'm your host, Morgan Grace. Today on the program, we're going to be chatting with Lindsey Whittle. She wears many hats at the Academy, both figuratively and literally. She's a professor. She's a garment and time-based artist specializing in collaboration and color. We're going to talk about garment as an art form and the trilogy of classes she's created for the Academy. Lindsey, welcome to the program. How are you?
Good. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Where did the name Sparklezilla come from?
Oh, that's funny. Not many people ask me that. Actually, when I think I was in my mid-20s. I actually don't know exactly how old I was, but I lived in Gifu, Japan, and I was really missing my friends and family back here. I was teaching English over there. So I decided to create this online magazine where we could all, collaborate and put in things together and make this interesting publication. And I couldn't come up with a name for the magazine. And so I was talking to one of my oldest friends who really knows me like really deeply. And we were just throwing out all of these different ideas. And somehow through this conversation, that word came out of it. And it just felt like perfect as soon as it came out. And I feel like that sums up my whole practice, that it almost always I'm putting two heads together to produce a result. Like it's very rarely just me. And I love that, this huge part of my identity now came out of a conversation of one of my oldest friends. So
that's really cool. When you talk about two minds coming together, you talk about that a lot in your methodology for garment and art. What about collaboration is so appealing?
There's this Hindu parable that has really shaped, I think, most of my art practice and my teaching practice, which is three blind men approach an elephant, and one grabs the trunk and thinks the elephant is a snake, and one grabs the leg and thinks the elephant is a tree, and one grabs the ear and thinks the elephant is a bird. So individually, none of them really understand what an elephant is, but when they come together and they talk about it, they have a better sense of what an elephant is. And I think that's kind of how I live my life, is like I have a bigger understanding of life in the universe by putting my mind together with somebody else. So
how many people do you think you've collaborated with over the years? Like over 100?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, I don't know if I could count. I mean, I'm sort of maintaining a list of people right now that I call my shape languages. So right now I have 25 active collaborators, but I don't think there's any way I could count how many people I've collaborated since, sort of seeing myself as a professional artist. It would definitely be in the hundreds, I think. So
when did this shape language methodology, when did that begin?
Well, I mean, I think in shapes. So, shapes have always been a part of my art practice. Even if I go back to undergrad, you can see that me making choices about shapes and the language of shapes in my work is such a driving force. But I don't think I started to understand that or put language to it until probably about midway through grad school or a little bit after grad school, which was around 2013, 2014. But I had a show in 2019 at the CAC. I was part of a 3-person show called Archive as Action. It was a really powerful show for my work and working with those other 2 amazing women. And but so that show felt like a lot of punctuation to me. I had been working with the idea of connection. I was trying to use my work as a way to connect people together, to connect myself to other artists, and to connect people to my work. And I just felt like I was moving on from some ideas. It felt like I had really pushed some of those things in every direction I could, and I was ready to start shifting into some new lines of thought. And teamwork became this really nice shift out of connection, which a conversation with my friend Joe, we determined that teamwork is connection towards a goal. So really kind of the same thing, just a little bit different. But so for that show at the CAC, I had developed this, what I called a shape language with my husband. And we had mined a lot of drawings that we had done together since we started dating for just interesting shapes that we thought were, somehow pulled us in or engaged us. And then I used those shapes that I had pulled from those drawings to make all visual choices in that show. And I felt like the result was everything was communicating with each other because I was using the same foundation to make choices from. And then after that show, I really was interested in starting languages with all of my frequent collaborators because I've started to see these shape languages as the space between me and these other people. And like, what is that space? And the result of these different collaboration languages is that they really challenge me in different ways. Like my friend Lorraine, who's also a teacher at the Art Academy, she's the chair of video and animation. Her shape language is the language of architecture. And I was very caught off guard because she wanted her shapes to be three-dimensional. And I didn't even realize until she gave me this challenge that I think in two-dimensional shapes. And just adding 3D to it just completely threw me off and put me into a little bit of an existential crisis, but in like a really good way. And a lot of the shape languages have done that for me. Like my husband's current shape language is the language of mirroring. And that's incredibly hard for me because I love asymmetry, and to have everything symmetrical is like very stressful for me. So it's interesting how each of these collaboration languages forces me out of my comfort zone just a little bit. And I think I get to outcomes that I never would have gotten to on my own.
When you talk about your teaching style and really empowering your students to participate, there's an aspect of teaching that forces your students out of their comfort zone too. Do you ever meet with resistance from the students?
Sometimes, but not really. I always tell people that as a teacher, I try to be 50-50 Mr. Rogers and John Cage. So Mr. Rogers was just like so supportive and just a really like positive grounding force for people, whereas John Cage was this fearless experimenter who would just constantly put himself in situations where the outcomes were unknown. So I really do challenge my students to take risks and step out of their comfort zone and be vulnerable, but I really build a strong foundation of support so that they know when some of those risks have outcomes they weren't expecting or didn't like, that I'm going to help them through it. So, because people don't realize this, but curiosity is actually a privilege. If you don't have support, you're not going to take risks. And so almost always the first half of the semester for me is just creating situations where the students learn that they can take risks and they can make the worst piece ever in my class. And I'm going to find that exciting, and I'm going to help them work through that and figure out, because all ideas are trying to be something. And sometimes as artists, it takes us, like I've had projects where it took me like 5 years to understand what that piece was trying to be. And I think if we shut it down because it's maybe not hitting some outcomes we were expecting, then that idea never really gets to manifest the way it could have. So
Matt Hart talked about writing poetry and never starting with an idea. And that the process dictates the journey and the outcome. When you're creating clothes, do you ever have an idea in your mind of like what you want that piece to be?
I think the driving thing that helps me create work is falling into my interests and just being authentic about those interests. So I think the things I love are probably the things that guide my choices the most. But I very intentionally build a foundation that I make decisions from. And right now that's this shape language project that I've been working on since 2019. And it's still fairly new. I'm still learning how to talk about that project. But so if I sit down to make a garment, I'm probably going to defer to my shape languages to make choices. With the exception of I make a wedding dress every year on my anniversary, and I just let that one be pure play. And that's like the one time when I just let myself make something really fun. And that's sort of a way to kind of recommit, in my marriage, and kind of if we got married this year, this is what we would have looked like. And I think this year will be the ninth, I think it's the ninth dress. I'm not sure. It's been a lot of dresses, but it's interesting how you can really see different things about us with each one. But that was a reaction when I got married. Everybody was like, "Oh my gosh, your dress is going to be the best dress of your life. It's going to be so great." And that really depressed me. Like I was like, "Well, if I make the best dress of my life right now, what do I have to look forward to?" So I take a stab at that best dress every year, and each year I'm like, "This one's my favorite." But then the next year I'm like, "This one's my favorite." So I love them all for different reasons, but so that's the one time where there really isn't a conceptual foundation to what I'm making. That's like where I just let myself make a cool outfit, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's the kind of fearlessness that one must be willing to model for their students, you know.
Hmm.
And that is a lot of pressure to be like, well, I'm a designer and I'm going to make my wedding dress, so it better be good. But, so that's the best part of art is the contrast between stuff that, you're maybe really proud of and stuff that's like, well, that was something I made on a Tuesday, You kind of
Well,
need
one of
that.
the dresses is so awkward. My mom calls it the birdhouse dress. I was working at a mascot shop at that time, and I was exploring EVA foam as a way to build structure. And so it like comes out like a spaceship on the side. It's a really strange dress, but that's okay. Like I love that. Like that's one of the many wedding dresses, and I love the original one too for different reasons. But so I have this fantasy. I collaborate a lot with an Art Academy alum, Steve Kemple, and so I reenacted my wedding in 2019 when because I got married at the Contemporary Art Museum in Cincinnati. So we saw the space itself as an artifact. So, and we had all of our friends gift us performance art at the reception, and the wedding had kind of become legend. So we decided to revisit those performances and ideas. And we reenacted the original performances, and we invited new people that we had met since we got married to perform, and it was amazing. And I exhibited 5 of the wedding dresses at the CAC. But my fantasy is to reenact it again as an opera that my friend Steve and I would write together because Steve is a composer. Um, but our goal is that we would actually cast 10 Lindseys to wear like all 10 dresses to wear in the opera. So that's something we work on the side. It's going to take us a long time, but we've written the 3 acts, like we have the synopsis. We just have to keep pushing that to make that a reality. But
That's amazing. Do you ever sometimes get lost in the boundaries between life and art as life, and like
mm,
where does the day to
I mean, I
day?
sure hope so. I sure want to. I mean, that's that I try more and more and more to shed the boundaries between art and life. I actually just wrote this down the other day. So this is a new train of thought. Hopefully I don't regret putting it out there into the world. But so, I have Lindsey, and then I have Sparklezilla. And then also from the past year or so, I have this persona called Future Lindsey that was developed between me. My husband is a comic book artist, and he had developed a character, Future Clint. And I had been working on this other project on the side that I was calling Sparklezilla Extreme, which was like this, like taking myself and multiplying it by like 100. So I was trying to be taller and more colorful, and like taking the aspects of myself and multiplying it. But then we decided to create Future Lindsey to pair up with Future Clint in his stories. But it turned out that Future Lindsey ended up becoming Sparklezilla Extreme, and she's this sort of other persona what I wrote down was that she is merging Lindsey and Sparklezilla, but times like 100. So I think my dream life is being Future Lindsey, where there is no, because I see Lindsey as the person who wears her pajamas with her cat and like just kind of chills at home, and then Sparklezilla is more like my art persona, and I think Future Lindsey is where those boundaries no longer exist, and she's like always the artist. So I'm constantly looking for ways to turn like every aspect of my life into an art experience, but it's like it's a slow, you chip away at it a little bit at a time. Because this is a want I've had for a long time, and and I have some friends that we discuss it a lot, and it's very challenging to find ways to intentionally make those shifts. Hopefully that train of thought made sense. Like I said, it's still very new, so I'm still understanding it, but
Yeah, I think when you wear your art, you're incorporating it into your daily life. When did that start for you?
I'm an Art Academy alum. I graduated in 2007, and my whole life I went to private Catholic education, and I had to wear a uniform. So it was like a white blouse and some kind of a pleated plaid skirt. Each school had different skirts, but it was all kind of the same thing. And then I went to art school, and I remember asking one of the teachers, "Can I wear backless shoes?" Because when I was at, in high school with this uniform, even when we had dress down days, there were still all of these regulations. And there was something about backless shoes being a fire hazard or something. So we weren't allowed to wear sandals or clogs or anything. And I remember the teacher looking at me like I had three heads and was like, "You can wear whatever you want." And that statement was so shocking to me. And so I started by wearing costumes every day. So one day I would be a chef, and the next day I would be a ballerina, and then I would be a ninja or whatever. And then it slowly shifted and morphed over time, and to the point where now it's become very specific wearable projects. So like around two, I didn't, so I started using my body to sketch ideas and bring those ideas out of art spaces and into my daily life in 2004 when I started art school. I did not start documenting it until 2009. And I was attending a fashion program at that time. And I would sort of like make collages of costumes and fashion and all kinds of crazy stuff. And then I've taken on a lot of different wearable projects since then. I wore paper every day for a year in 2013. That often gets discussed a lot. And I'm nervous and excited about that because I'm actually going to wear paper again starting in January. January will be 10 years since that project. And I still have all the paper that I wore. And I love the idea of revisiting something that was really pivotal for you 10 years later, like seeing, will they be the same? Will they be different? So, but I'm going to end my current wearable project, which is a collaboration with a fellow garment artist in Chicago, Sky Kubaku, who runs Rebirth Garments. I don't have a lot of it on right now because I'm at home, but Sky sends me pieces of chainmail that they make, and they all have clips, and I can, lock it on in all these different ways on my body. And it weirdly also became about mental health for me because chainmail is very, very heavy. And if I wear all of it, it takes a lot out of me. Like I get neck pain and shoulder pain. And by the end of the day, on one hand, you're literally wearing armor, like you're going into battle with armor. And it also reminds me of Sky. Like if I'm just feeling stressed or nervous, I can kind of like touch it and think about what an amazing friend this is. But on the other hand, it's so draining to wear a lot of it. So you can actually kind of tell if I'm getting a lot of sleep and taking care of myself, because then I'll put on more chainmail. And then if I'm just feeling really exhausted, I might just put on a little bit. But I've been doing this for about probably 2.5 years. And so I'll end that in December. And I get kind of emotional because I get really attached to my wearable project. So it's always a weird shift, but I think it's a good thing when you're a little bit scared or nervous of your work. I think that means you're onto something. So yeah, so I've been doing wearable projects since 2004, and they've taken on a lot of different forms, but it's maybe the most basic way that I work and sketch. Like literally every day, I'm creating shapes and patterns and collages on my body and integrating with people, both in art settings and in the grocery store and wherever else I go. So yeah, I think it's a really pivotal part of my practice.
Wow. I've never really thought of clothes and garments as art outside of the traditional, fashion and costuming and stuff. And so, how did you come about writing the curriculum of art garment as art for the academy? Because it's quite a unique offering to the academy, right?
Yeah, I actually don't know of another art school that's teaching garment as an art form. And I did an art residency this summer called Residency Unlimited in Brooklyn, New York. And I went to this exhibition called Garmenting, and it was the first time I've ever seen a museum take up a stance on garment as an art form. So I went to see this exhibition twice because I was just so excited. And I've already read the catalog like cover to cover because I just love that language is now starting to be built around garment as an art form, not necessarily fashion or costume. And those lines can be blurred. I always say that I'm an artist that makes garments versus a fashion designer that makes art. And I think both of those things can happen. But but so I was at this, the second time I went to the garmenting show was a field trip through my residency, and we got to have a tour from the curator, which was amazing. And I was telling her about this program at the Art Academy, and she even said that she had never heard of an art school that was teaching garment as an art form. So she was excited that we offered this as well. But basically, like I said, I'm an alum from the Art Academy, and my thesis was for garments. My mother is a fashion designer. She's the best seamstress I know, actually. She could run circles. I have a strong ability, but she could run circles around my ability. But it's really fun because we work together a lot and we bounce off of each other and things. But so my mom helped me make 4 garments for my thesis. I also made some sculptures, and I had dancers perform with the sculptures at the opening. So I think there was always a part of me that knew that garment was the next direction, but I didn't have the skills to, like, I didn't know how to sew or drape or pattern make. So I had the ideas, I had the direction, but I didn't have the skill set. So after I graduated, I taught English for a year in Japan at a fashion high school in Gifu, which is the sister city to Cincinnati. And then I did a few years at a fashion undergrad because I couldn't do my fashion master's yet because I had no foundation. I couldn't sew or pattern make or any of those things. And then I didn't finish the second fashion undergrad program because I got into a master's program at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, led by sound suit artist Nick Cave. And it just seemed like, a life-changing opportunity to work with someone like Nick. And what I loved about it was that it was a mixture of fine art and fashion. Like, Nick teaches that program because Nick is an artist. He's maybe one of somebody who's really developed garment as an art form, because his sound suits are these otherworldly creatures that aren't quite fashion and they aren't quite art. There's something in between. So I felt like learning from him would be really pivotal for my development. So I went on to get a master's in fashion, and I took all of my, I don't know what you call those, like extra credits that aren't for your major in performance art, which of course is incredibly relevant to garment because the body itself is alive. So, learning how to work with time and the body in a garment is really important. So I kind of feel like I went out and I learned the things that I wanted to learn in undergrad, and I brought them back to the Art Academy. I've been a part of a lot of different academic institutions, both as a teacher and as a student, and the Art Academy is my favorite. I think a lot of people think that why would you move back from Chicago? Or, you've lived in New York and Japan and Chicago. Why are you living in Cincinnati? But it's actually very strategic for me. The cost to live in Cincinnati is so much more reasonable. My husband and I bought a 4-floor building, and our mortgage is like half the price of my 1-bedroom apartment in Chicago. So I'm able to, and we use that building to run an art gallery, which is amazing. And I would not be able to afford to do this in a major city. But also, like, the art scene in Cincinnati is so authentic, and like everybody is rooting for each other. Everybody knows everybody. And I remember when I was in Chicago, I really wanted to do this piece where I was bringing performance art to nursing homes because I felt like the people who needed to be inspired had no access to art. And it was just really hard to find people that would work with me because of HIPAA laws and things like that. Because I was a small fish in a big pond. Whereas in Cincinnati, I could make that piece happen very quickly because I know somebody who knows somebody that could help me make that happen. So I feel like I'm able to produce more as an artist because I have more time to give to my work because of the cost to, I work less jobs because of my cost to live, but also I have so many people here that support my work and believe in my work and open doors for me. But on top of that, I intentionally, came back and wanted to work at the Art Academy because I've never seen an institution that comes at students with so much support. A lot of the institutions I've worked with, which are all great for different reasons, but often schools are kind of pushing you in the direction of a product that then they market out to their whatever companies work with them, which is, if you want to work for a specific company and that school will lead you in that direction, that can be a really great thing. But what I love about the Art Academy is they help you figure out who you want to be, and then they support you to become that. Mm-hmm. And I think if I hadn't done that first, fashion school is rough. Like I remember I was doing, we had to do these things called croquis. They're drawings of bodies, and they're really elongated, skinny bodies. And we would have to do like 300 drawings in a weekend. And the point was, if you just keep drawing a body over and over again, it becomes muscle memory. So when you sit down to draw your ideas, it comes out of you very quickly. But I was interested in drawing normal bodies and or like a variety of bodies. And sometimes I even drew like robots and aliens and things like that, because these are things that interested me. But I remember they would take a Sharpie to my drawings and they would like take their waist in, put the thigh gap in. And I would get like C's on these drawings because I wasn't doing this like body type that was expected for fashion school. And I didn't care because I had built an authentic foundation of who I was at the Art Academy. And I was like strong in that. So I had the ability to push through when I was being pushed against, because I did that first. And they continued to support me. Like even after I graduated, they were still rooting for me and building that support. So I very intentionally wanted to go out and learn the things that I had wanted to learn when I was at the Art Academy, and I brought it back and sort of built those classes from scratch, which was like such a joy and so fun. And I love each of the 3 classes for different reasons, but they're like very special to me, if that makes sense. So
Yeah,
sorry that
definitely.
was so long-winded.
It would be worse for me if you were not.
Oh, okay.
No, I love it. It's all very fascinating. Speaking of the academy and the support, just from the website, they say they provide guidance and resources for rebellious young creatives.
Mm.
And you don't get that a lot in, academia.
Yeah, they empowered me and never I feel like for a lot of my life people always loved me, but they never understood who I was, or like why even as a young person, I would wear ridiculous things and my family would be like, what are you doing? I mean, now they're totally used to me and I think they would even feel uncomfortable if I didn't dress the way I was. But I think it was so nice to be at a program where they just totally were with whatever mattered to me and like respected who I was and let me grow into that and shine in that and not sort of like push it out of me. Whereas when I was in, particular fashion programs, I felt like sometimes they were trying to like squash or push that out of me because I wasn't sort of fitting into the expectation of that role. So it's very refreshing to witness a program that really wants each student to be who they need to be, and grow into that. And it's hard. It's hard to let go of all the expectations that are put on us from birth of who we're supposed to be. Because sometimes when you fall into what you already are and learn how to grow that, like that's when magic happens, so.
Agreed. Yeah. So when you're a young, rebellious creative, in Lindsey Whittle's class, her original year-long curriculum, what's in store for you that year?
Surprises and adventure for sure. So I teach 3 classes. I teach textile lab and then a garment class and a performance class. And I've always seen them as a trilogy, even though I feel like that most people are like, what? How are these things related? I mean, garment and textile are obvious, but so textile, we really explore the idea of what is a surface. And the class is very grounded in experimentation and research. And it's really my way of showing students how to have an art practice outside of art school, which is grounded in experimentation and curiosity and research and writing, but in a very informal way. Like I want to normalize it and make it feel natural and not like, oh, I have to write something and, not make it feel like a project, but just make it feel like an extension of them. So that class can get weird in an amazing way, like, because they're just constantly experimenting on different processes. And then they're encouraged to really dig into one concept all semester and let that grow, and try to work through that concept in all these weird processes than they might not have done on their own. And then the garment class is about bringing that surface to the body and making shapes on the body and using the body as a way to communicate ideas. And certainly students that have an interest in fashion will get a lot out of that class also. But I think we take a more art conceptual approach to it in a way that's kind of different from how sewing is taught, because they do learn how to sew and pattern make and drape. They kind of learn the foundations of it. but they're also working through concepts and the body almost as a sculptural form. And then the performance class is where we put the body in action and we learn ideas around time and action-based art and communicating through time and documentation of time. And that class tends to be the most fun class that I teach. It's just once you open that door of anything can be an art piece, you start to almost like every time I teach that class, like maybe one of the prompts is to have a phone call as a performance piece. Well, then the next time I'm on the phone with my mom, I kind of start questioning reality. I'm like, wait, is this reality or an art piece? So I feel like the performance class really starts to dig into what is a moment of art and what is a moment of non-art, and does it matter? I don't even know. But I often take that class. I haven't done it the past 2 years because of COVID, but for many classes, I took the performance class to Chicago for the weekend, and we would immerse ourselves in that performance scene. And it's usually a really fun and amazing trip. And then also in previous performance classes, that class culminates in some sort of a performance exhibition where a lot of them have been connected to the Contemporary Art Museum's performance festival called This Time Tomorrow. Same with the garment class, often culminates in an exhibition, sometimes a magazine, and same with the textile class. So, I think a lot of students go to fashion school because they want to be Alexander McQueen, or, they want to be that person that's putting on this sculptural, crazy couture show, Victor and Rolf, Rei Kawakubo. But often fashion school tends to be very trend-based, very business-based. It's a lot of flat patterning, flat designing. And fashion school will get you a job in being a flat pattern designer at a company like JCPenney's or Black White. And those are great jobs if that's what you're looking for. But I think if you're going into fashion school to be that person that makes the sculptural, crazy experiences on the runway, that's not always how you get there. Usually the fashion design track is that you would graduate from a fashion school, you would work some non-paid internships for 3 or 4 years while working probably some kind of horrible night job to cover your rent, and then maybe you work up the ladder of doing business things to get to a design tier level. But a lot of those people that get to that higher level, it tends to be who you know, how much connections and monetary foundation you already have. Whereas we take a stance of starting off with that creative side. The Art Academy's garment program lets you jump right in making the crazy sculptural stuff and doing performances with those crazy sculptural things. And a lot of my friends, I mentioned Sky Kubakub of Rebirth Garments, they studied garment as an art form. Like they sort of self-taught themselves. They went to an art program for their undergrad and they taught themselves to make garments, and they created their own garment line from scratch, which they run in Chicago. And they've been, written about, and they're quite, people know who they are, I guess. And that was all self-developed. So I feel like that's kind of the approach that we take, is we help you figure out what kind of garments you want to make and how you can make that a reality on your own. So I just want to point that out, that most art schools offer garment and sewing as a fashion point of view or a costume design point of view. And we offer it as a way to communicate your ideas on the body. And we give you a lot of autonomy in that process. So I just feel like it's a very different, we offer something that just isn't offered anywhere else. So
that's really cool. And an important distinction.
Mm-hmm. Right. And we talk about that a lot in the garment class. Like, what are these distinctions between art and fashion? And even, does it matter? I think it helps for when you're explaining yourself or explaining your work to kind of figure out where you want to situate your ideas. But students in the garment class can definitely be interested in fashion. In fact, I offer a sewing club on Thursdays where students can just come for fun and make stuff. It's not for a class or anything. But another student has approached me. She's starting a fashion club, and I'll be the advisor for that club. So we're not anti-fashion by any means. We're just letting the things that you make go in many directions. It doesn't have to be like one track. So
very cool. Are you already teaching course number 1 of the trilogy?
I teach Textile Lab in the fall, and then I teach Garment and Performance in the spring. And students don't have to take them in that order. And a lot of students don't. I just see it that way in my mind. But they're very different classes, but all for like they're great in their own way. It's okay that they're different. But the performance class is probably the most wild and the most unexpected and fun. And most of my students that take that class say that they've never taken a class like that. So
Yeah, I bet it sounds the most confronting of all three of
it
them.
is, but in a simple, supportive way. Like, you know, in that class, tapping your foot can be a performance. I think a lot of students think when they go into that class, like, I'm going to have to do this elaborate theater type show on a stage or something. But performance can take on so many forms. Like maybe sometimes as a performance artist, you're more of a director and less of a performer. And, or maybe you write scores and you give that to a group of people to perform. Like the class really lets you figure out what kind of time-based artist are you. And even, you know, I've had designers take that class, illustrators take that class, and it just gives you such a unique point of view, and it makes you think about your ideas and your work in such a broader lens. Like you don't have to be a performance artist to take that class. It will open you up and inform your other work in such a bigger way than you expected once you start approaching life and art in such a different angle of aliveness. I think performance art has an aliveness to it. Whereas, you know, if you make a painting and it's hung on the wall, you know, maybe that's a little bit more like there is an interaction between the viewer and the painting, but there's an aliveness to being in the moment with an art experience and having your audience interact with you. It's just a different way to approach things. So,
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much for talking today.
oh, thank you so much.
Lindsey teaches Textile and Fiber Lab, Garment and Body, and her performance course, Time is an Elephant, which students can still register for until November 18th. Check her out online at www.sparklezilla.com. I'm Morgan Grace. This has been Making Art on Air. Thanks for watching.